Welcome back! Today we are doing something so fun. Book club! How many autism books are on your to-read list? Seriously, I know my list used to be really long. These book club videos are all about helping you out. You vote on what book I read the book, and then I summarize it for you. It's fun! I love it! I want you to have the best information to make good decisions for your child. How can you have a say in what book I summarize? Join my email list. There's a link below. They get to vote every month on what book would be most helpful to have a summary and discussion about. So join us. There's a link below. Join my email list. And if you like these types of videos, please let me know in the comments. Also, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for the best science-based information about autism. Thank you for being here. And now, without further ado, this month's book club is... So this book starts out with a great quote, and I think you know me by now. You know I love quotes. So it says, "He who wishes to fly one day must first learn standing and walking and running and climbing and dancing. One does not fly into flying." And that is very, very true about everything in life, but very specifically autism. So let's get into a little bit of the walking and how do you go from where you are to flying. All right, so they talk about here very clear evidence of gastrointestinal dysbiosis in both autism and schizophrenia. So they do make some comparisons, and I should say this book is very technical. And it's very technical talking about the root causes. It doesn't go into deep detail about treatments, specific supplements. There's a few here and there, but this book really focuses on causes, root causes, which is great because that's what you want to address for your child. You don't want to just kind of give them a supplement to mask things. You want to get to the root cause and address that so that they don't have that problem for the rest of their lives. So here they start out by saying how there is evidence how both autism and schizophrenia, they have different comorbidities and dysbiosis locations. However, it's obviously very important. And the mechanisms involved include 1, neuroinflammation, 2, neurotransmitter altering metabolites, especially p-cresol and HPA, and 3, dysbiosis-induced activation of the NLRP3 inflammasome. So they'll get into that in a little bit more in the book. And some of the interventions that they consider here in this book is fecal microbiota transplant. I do have videos on that. I'll make sure to put links below there. And also antibiotics, whether it be a pharmaceutical, FDA approved, or a natural botanical agent. Then it goes on to discuss vitamin D, and it's a common intervention. So this is one of the few therapies that this book talks about. And vitamin D is very important. I have almost like a 20-minute video on vitamin D. So I'll read the quote here from the book. "Vitamin D is also one of the interventions we commonly use when we're dealing with dysbiosis-induced disease. The reasons include the fact that vitamin D enhances immunity, so it helps to clear out some of those infections and colonizations." It goes on to say that vitamin D is essential for antimicrobial peptides, for supporting secretory IgA production, as well as maintaining the integrity of the gut mucosal lining, as well as anti-inflammatory effects. So you can see those are all good things. And many times children with autism have issues with, you can just start with inflammation in the broad sense. So vitamin D is really helping to have an anti-inflammatory effect, as well as it's focused on the immune system, which for the majority of the body is in the gut. So vitamin D is extremely important, universally. So your vitamin D levels, you should have a blood test winter and then kind of spring, summer. You will change supplement levels throughout the year. Very, very important for sure. It goes on to talk about exercise a little bit, right? That is a great therapy. So the reason why exercise is so great is that there's a variety of anti-inflammatory effects that you get from exercise. We all know that, so I'm not going to go into that too much. Many parents know when their kids get a lot of outdoor activity, a lot of exercise, they sleep better. There's a reason why. It's not magic. All right, here's a very good quote, and so I'll read this quote directly from the book. "We now know that autism is a multifaceted disorder associated with gastrointestinal inflammation, nutritional deficiencies, multiple food allergies and intolerances, impairments in liver detoxification, and resultant accumulation of xenobiotics, the majority of which have either neurotoxic or immunotoxic effects. Thus, autism is not a behavioral disorder per se, rather it is a gastrointestinal, allergic, immunologic, toxicant, nutritional, environmental disorder, and the behavioral cognitive abnormalities are symptoms of the underlying complex and interconnected pathophysiology." So this is, I know many parents struggle with, what really is autism? And I have many clinicians who watch my videos, many different therapists, and I get that question often, what really is autism? And this is one answer. I wouldn't say it's a perfect answer, but it gives that good picture of it's not just one thing, and there's a few things that really need to be addressed in detail to see the health improve of a child. So this is a very good description. If you have someone who's kind of struggling with the idea of what really is autism, what am I dealing with, what should I be looking at, this is a good book for someone who is technical and wants to answer those kinds of questions. Okay, so it talks a little bit about microbial metabolites and how they interfere with normal neurotransmission, and that promotes psychosis and neurotoxicity. So this is important because the gut is important, and the microbes in the gut produce molecules. And scientists, researchers, they call that metabolites. So there are metabolites in the gut that are produced by different bacteria and a variety of different organisms in the gut. And they have an effect on our body, right? So when there's no dysbiosis, we got bacteria, they're producing vitamins, we're feeling good, they're producing the B12 and vitamin K and everything's going, right? But when there's dysbiosis, so when things aren't optimal, then this is where you can have neurotoxicity and psychosis. So this book specifically addresses HP, HPA, as well as paracrisol, sometimes abbreviated pcrisol. And so both those metabolites, meaning those are molecules produced by bacteria, both of those metabolites block the conversion of dopamine, and that leads to excess dopamine, right? And what happens is excess dopamine is neurotoxic. It's not good to have too much of really anything in our bodies. And so this fact has been known for decades, and the classic antipsychotic drugs are also anti-dopamine. So that means that they are blocking the dopamine receptors, and that's how they're thought to provide their therapeutic benefit. So we call that the mechanism of action. So this isn't some new science that's coming out. The dopamine levels are really important. But again, for your child, you want to go to the root cause. You can certainly give some type of relief, right, with a drug, with a supplement that can help even out the dopamine levels. But you want to go deeper than that. That might be good for the short term. For the long term, you really want to get to what the issue is. And what this book is saying is the issue is different bacteria in the gut that are producing certain metabolites that are causing the dopamine to be increased. Okay, so dysbiosis. This book has a really good definition of dysbiosis. And so it has 4 parts. Let me read you those 4 parts. So typically the term dysbiosis includes 1, qualitatively more microbes. So sometimes microbes, they're supposed to be in the large intestine, they kind of scooch up into the small intestine. That's called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. You just have too much bacteria going on and it's starting to go in places that it shouldn't, which is not good. Number 2 is more absorption of inflammatory and allergic producing molecules. So certain aspects of the gut, you can have increased permeability. It's called in mainstream media leaky gut, right? And so then inflammatory molecules that normally would be housed in your gut and excreted, right? They get to, again, go to places in the body where they should not be going. Number 3, qualitatively worse microbes. So this is when you have pathogenic microbes. So pathogenic fungus, pathogenic bacteria. You have too much of the bad things and not enough of the good things. Basically, that's a good summary. And number 4, you have adverse health effects. So these microbial imbalances, they're important because it leads to overall health. So there's a lot that goes on with our gut, right? Our immune system is in our gut. So much is in our gut. And when we have these imbalances, then you can see health change. And the research is starting to have more of that linear relationship. Okay, this happens, then this happens. So this is what the definition of dysbiosis means. Basically, things are not optimal in the gut. Those are the 4 aspects that doctors are looking at when they're talking about dysbiosis. Okay, to talk about neuroinflammation a little bit. Neuroinflammation is something that children with autism deal with a lot. And neuroinflammation enhances glutamate, so the glutamate neurotransmitter. And that also then reduces the levels of serotonin and melatonin. All right, and melatonin, right? Everyone hears that and they think sleep, right? Very, very true. But here the author, I'm really glad that he has is, yes, he says, I want you to think not simply of sleep, but also melatonin's potent antioxidant effects and also its ability to help protect and maintain mitochondrial function. So this is so important with overall health again. So neuroinflammation, it starts off with neurotransmitters being unbalanced and it affects melatonin, which then affects sleep and then has this downstream effect that leads to really poor quality of life, frankly. When a child's not sleeping, then quality of life goes down very quickly for both the child and the parent. So it's good for me to see here in this book how the author is very mindful of melatonin not being just about sleep. Okay, next he talks about HPHPA and p-cresol and also propionic acid. So these again are the metabolites. So these are molecules that are being produced in the gut of someone by bacteria, fungus, organisms in your gut. And so the 3 of them are microbial metabolites that, according to preclinical and experimental data, have the ability to contribute to neuropsychiatric dysfunction. So it's important that these molecules are taken into account when you're addressing your child's health issues. So let's look specifically at elevated quinolonic acid. And here, I'll just read the little section here about it. Quinolonic acid is a potent excitatory neurotoxin, elevated in Huntington's disease, Alzheimer's disease, ALS, depression, suicide, and other forms of neuroexcitation and neurodegeneration. High levels of quinolonic acid promote seizures, and 20 to 33% of those with autism have recurrent seizures, while up to 60% of those with autism have the silent form of seizures. Sometimes you might see your child and then kind of come back. Many times, I'm not going to say always, but many times those are the silent seizures that the books are talking about. And so seizures are certainly something to be addressed. And if your doctor can zero it down to certain metabolites in the gut and give a simple protocol to have the gut be optimal, that's definitely something worth pursuing. All right, so moving right along, talking a little bit more about propionic acid, again, a metabolite. And propionic acid induced autistic features in rat pups as potential markers of autism. So there's been research done on that. And it showed that propionic acid integrates into the cellular membranes, displaces other polyunsaturated fatty acids, and therefore impairs the physiological function of those cell membranes, which of course include neurotransmitter reception. This is all important to understand because there are these downstream effects, and it's important when addressing health issues. So it goes on to talk a little bit more about propionic acid and its potential to contribute to autism. So there are 3 ways that this author is proposing. So number 1, propionic acid is produced by gastrointestinal bacteria, especially those bacteria in the notoriously neurotoxic Clostridium group. Number 2, propionic acid is a fatty acid that becomes integrated into the cell membranes of neurons and into the membranes of mitochondria. This alteration in the structure of neurons and mitochondria leads to their impairment. Again, this is not something that you want to go on long term in your child's body. Number 3, according to animal studies, propionic acid promotes neuroinflammation, which is also a known characteristic of human autism. So again, they're studying on animals, applying it to what we already know in humans. All right, let's talk a little bit about microbiota transfer therapy, MTT, or also fecal microbiota transplant, FMT. That's another way many people refer to it as. I have 2 videos on FMT. There's 2 kind of groundbreaking studies in autism with FMT. This book just briefly discusses it and says about how autism symptoms improved significantly and remained improved at 8 weeks after the treatment ended. Now, I have had clients whose children have had FMTs. It doesn't resolve everything. It certainly resolves some things, but please don't think of it as a magic bullet. It's not. And if you read the research on FMTs in autism, you'll see that there are also non-responders. So not everyone with autism responds to FMT. I know it might seem like, oh, yes, okay, everybody should be doing FMTs, but there are non-responders. So it's important to keep that in mind. And again, if you want more detailed videos on that, look for the link down below because I have 2 videos on that. All right, let's talk about glyphosate. All right, so the model proposed here is that the herbicide glyphosate causes Clostridial dysbiosis, leading to excess gastrointestinal production of HPA and p-cresol, leading to dopamine psychosis, neurotoxicity, and mitochondrial dysfunction. So this is really, it gets to it proposes here a rational line of biological plausibility. And again, sometimes parents, even clinicians, are wondering, well, how does it progress? How does this all fit together, right? So here it proposes 1, antibiotic exposure. So glyphosate herbicide, and that's in just about all food everywhere except for organics and stuff, but still, it's in a lot of our foods. And what happens is it functions as an antibiotic within our own gut. So we eat it. So some children with autism, they've never taken antibiotics. So sometimes parents are questioning, how is this happening? My child wasn't on antibiotics. Glyphosate, which is in the majority of the food, acts as an antibiotic in our gut. And it kills off beneficial bacteria, and it allows the growth of opportunistic pathogens. So number 2 is gastrointestinal dysbiosis with mind-altering metabolites. And so this happens especially with Clostridia, with HPHPA and picarsol, which are the metabolites produced by this. And then step 3 is altered behavior and cognition. So in the body, you have all these different changes going on, and so many molecules are not at their optimal levels, right? So what are you going to see? You're going to see altered behavior, altered cognition, and many times that's when a diagnosis is made. You know, when someone's not functioning, then the diagnosis of autism is observational. So if we're waiting and waiting and waiting, and you finally see these behaviors, it's because a few steps before, a lot of things were not optimal. So this book then leads right into about the mainstream medical perspective. And so I'll quote this book. The mainstream medical perspective that autism is a genetic disorder of behavior is selectively illogical, ignoring its exponential increase, which cannot be of genetic origin. Ignorant, selectively failing to integrate biological information, and self-serving, keeping children dependent on drugs, therapies, and the issues your child has with autism, right? So what you're observing. You don't want to just necessarily focus on that behavior. So there are many different biological reasons as to why your child has that behavior. And it's important to really get at the root cause of what's going on. And it goes on also to say, the fact is very clear that all of us, especially today's children, are exposed to an absurdly unregulated and invisible mixture of neurotoxins and mitochondrial toxins that promote what I call metabolic fragility, and that promotes various disease states. So that's what the author is saying. And in a way, it's very true. Our world today is very different than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. All right. The other thing that this book talks about is something that, let's see, Voldemort comes to mind. So there's a word that can't really be said that much anymore, and I don't know, I think I'll just call it Voldemort. Hopefully you know what I'm talking about, right? So this book talks about Voldemort, and it talks about a few perspectives. And I have to say, it has a good organization of data. There's one study that I really enjoyed, and I think it's powerful because it kind of shifts your perspective in what you think about, right? So they're not all bad, they're not all good. It's complicated. And so there's a study here that he quotes and says that in 2014 there was a pediatric study, and to his knowledge it's the first human study to identify microbial patterns associated with desired responses versus a microbial pattern associated with lower and increased systemic inflammation. So it's really saying how, all right, we understand that the immune system is in the gut. And when you give Voldemort, then you're actually trying to influence, in a way, the gut. So the gut microbiome profile plays a role in the immune response to Voldemort. So this is important to really study more and more, because what it's saying about how the responses are based upon the microbial patterns in the gut. So there's studies starting to do that. And that's really powerful. And I don't think many people really are looking at that and really understanding. It almost seems like they're two separate, right? So you have Voldemort and then you have, gut dysbiosis. But they're connected. They're in the same body. So I think if you want to get a deeper perspective on Voldemort, then definitely check out this book, because it is technical, and it might provide some answers for you if you're looking for that answer. Not every parent is. So I'm going to close here with a summary here, and it talks that how what happens with is it triggers a systemic neuroinflammatory response that might change the gut and lead to gut injury, right? So the gut might be different to begin with, right? Because maybe you're eating food with glyphosate and it was not optimal to begin with, but gut injury occurs and there's dysbiosis. And then that could explain the observed rapid onset neurobehavioral changes and the persistent neuroinflammation. And he says this is a hypothetical model and it needs to be tested in animal models as well as human studies. But it's a very interesting perspective on this aspect of health. And with that, I believe that is a good summary. So like I said, there's not much about treatments in here. It's really more about understanding those root causes, and these root causes can be addressed. So it's not as if I'm telling you anything that you can't take action on. Every single thing that was discussed here about dysbiosis, all of that can be addressed. And so definitely a good book if you're looking to have more understanding of why, and if you want a technical book, because these are all the references. So it's almost like half the book. Half the book is his theories and his summations, and then the other half is the references, and that's always good to have. So if you want to choose the next book club book, then make sure to sign up for my emails, and I hope you found this very enjoyable. So please like this and also subscribe. It'd be great to have you here.